All right, so we all know about the big battles and stuff from World War II, right? Like the major ones everybody's heard of.
Yeah.
The key leaders. But you know about all those stories that don't get talked about as much? You know what I mean? The stuff that maybe got tucked away in the corner of history.
Yeah.
Even though it was really important.
Yeah, exactly. Like all those stories that are just as vital.
Exactly.
But they haven't really been told.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing today. A deep dive into one of those fascinating stories. And we're going to be focusing specifically on the experiences of African-American women who served in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps during the war, World War II.
The WAAMC.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using Mary Cronk Farrell's book, Standing Up Against Hate, a story of brave women in World War II, as our guide for this.
Yes, that's right.
It's a really compelling look at not only what these women did to support the war effort and how much they contributed, but also, the very significant hurdles and challenges that they had to overcome in order to even serve.
Exactly.
And this deep dive, that's really for you, the listener, to really help kind of shed light on this inspiring chapter of history that we think deserves way more attention.
Yes.
And our goal here is to try to pull out the most, essential and important insights from Farrell's book about these courageous women.
Yeah.
What they faced, how they persevered, and the impact that they made, which we're still feeling today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't we start off by thinking about World War II like the backdrop?
Yeah, it was huge. It required an unprecedented mobilization.
Yeah.
Right. And that really meant that women stepped into all sorts of different roles to help out, to support the effort.
Right.
So it was a real turning point in terms of women's involvement, areas that traditionally were held by men.
Right. And so this is where the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the WAAC, comes in. So it was initially set up as a non-combatant branch. So these women were focused on these really crucial support roles like administration, driving vehicles, mechanics, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, mail management.
Oh, wow.
It was crucial.
Yeah.
These women volunteered to serve their country during this time of this huge global conflict. It's pretty amazing.
It is. And I think it's also really interesting to think about the fact that, for African-American women living in the 1940s, the decision to join the WAAC was, I think you could say it was particularly courageous.
Yes.
And as the book points out, it was really adventurous.
Yeah.
They were not only navigating, the demands of serving in the military, but also the deeply entrenched racial prejudice and segregation that was just pervasive in American society at the time. So this, the discrimination that they faced, it really adds another layer of complexity to their service.
Absolutely. And we really get to see a lot of this through the story of this one individual, Charity Adams.
Oh, yeah.
Who really, she becomes this central figure in understanding the broader experiences of all these women.
Right. And what really stands out about Charity Adams is her journey. By the end of the war, she had achieved the rank of the highest-ranking African-American woman in the entire U.S. military.
Wow.
Which is an extraordinary accomplishment given the social and military context.
It's huge.
It's huge of the era. So what qualities do you think allowed her to rise so high?
It's a great question. I think it certainly speaks to her leadership.
Yeah.
And I think, it's important to point out she wasn't just this symbolic figure. She actually commanded the only black WAAC battalion that was actually sent overseas.
Wow.
So think about the responsibility of leading these women in a segregated military during wartime.
In demand.
It's huge.
It is.
It is.
What kind of specific pressures do you think that put on her?
I mean, I think, well, first of all, the weight of representation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She's not only leading a battalion, but she also has to constantly prove the capabilities of black women in the military.
Yeah.
Right. Her leadership had to be impeccable to counter the prevailing prejudices. And speaking of that battalion, the book dedicates a lot of time talking about the 688th Central Postal Directory Battalion. This is an all-black, all-female unit. And their mission, while not on the front lines, it was super critical to the war effort.
Yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
When you think about it, their task was monumental.
Yeah.
They were sent to Europe, and they had to tackle this huge backlog of mail for American soldiers.
Wow.
Millions of letters and packages, often poorly addressed sometimes, just with nicknames. There's these really vague locations.
Wow.
I mean, it's hard to imagine how hard that must have been.
It's hard to even picture the scale of that challenge.
Yeah.
It truly was a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
But what's so remarkable is the dedication that these women brought to that job.
Right.
They understood how important mail was for the troops, right? It was their connection to home.
Right.
It was a vital source of comfort and normalcy amidst all that horror, you know? And so these women were the ones making sure that that lifeline wasn't broken, you know? And I think the efficiency that they brought to that task probably had a really tangible impact on morale and potentially even operational effectiveness.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
You know, a soldier getting a letter from home, that would boost their spirits so much. And the book highlights the fact that while Charity Adams' leadership was so important, this is really a story of a group. You know, Farrell names around 60 of these women. Wow. Which underscores that it wasn't just one person's experience.
Yeah.
But it was really a shared journey of many.
Yeah. But their service wasn't solely about, you know, overcoming all these logistical challenges.
Right.
They were also fighting a very real battle against discrimination in their own ranks, right?
Yes, absolutely. The racial prejudice and discrimination that these women faced within the U.S. military really mirrored the widespread segregation and inequality that, you know, was just everywhere in American society at the time.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that while they were fighting for freedom abroad, they're also fighting for basic dignity and equal treatment back at home.
Absolutely.
So can you give us some examples of what that looked like day to day?
Yeah, so the book details lots of instances of that. So separate living quarters were standard, and oftentimes Black women were housed in facilities that were inferior compared to white women. They had separate dining halls. Sometimes the food that they got was just lower quality, or they had limited options. And even during training, segregation persisted. So it really just reinforced this sense of being a second-class citizen despite their commitment to serving their country.
And it's especially upsetting to hear the accounts of Black women holding, you know, the same rank, same responsibilities as white women, but still being treated as subordinate or assigned these menial tasks just because of their race.
Yeah.
You know,
it highlights the deeply ingrained prejudices of the time and the added burden that these women carried. Yeah, it really underscores that. But what's so inspiring is that they didn't just accept this injustice.
Right.
Standing up against hate really emphasizes their active resistance to unfair treatment. So that courage in challenging the status quo is a key part of their story.
Yeah, and the book gives examples of these women protesting unfair job assignments. Like, for instance, skilled clerks being assigned cleaning duties.
Right.
I mean, that takes bravery, especially when you're in the military, which has such a strict hierarchy.
It does.
What were the risks involved in speaking out like that?
Well, the risks were significant.
Yeah.
They ranged from, you know, reprimands and getting undesirable reassignments to potentially even more severe disciplinary actions.
Yeah.
But they understood their value, and they understood that it was an unjust situation, and they were willing to put themselves on the line to challenge the system. And these protests weren't just about their own grievances, you know.
Right.
They were about fighting for the principle of equality and the recognition of their skills.
And beyond those actions, you know, the direct actions, the book talks about how they reached out to, you know, influential figures in the Black press.
Yeah.
Which I think shows, you know, a real understanding of the power of their story and the need to have a broad base of support for their fight for fair treatment.
Yeah, exactly. They really recognized that, you know, their individual actions could be amplified by bringing their experiences to the attention of a wider audience. And so it demonstrates their strategic thinking and their determination to affect change.
Right.
Not just for them, but for future generations.
And then they got deployed to Europe. After all of this, after all of that entrenched discrimination within the U.S. military, what was their experience like overseas?
Right.
Is it different?
It was quite different in some ways. The book really highlights this contrast. In Europe, the women of the 698th and 88th, they were reportedly welcomed with a much greater degree of respect and equality than they had experienced within the U.S. military, which really underscores how deeply entrenched segregation was, you know, Buckingham Estates. It's really telling, I think, that they found more acceptance in a war-torn foreign land than in their own country.
It is. It is. It's like, imagine going to fight for freedom and democracy in another country and finding more equitable treatment there than within your own army.
Exactly.
Wow. And after everything they had gone through, their commitment to this vital mission of delivering mail never wavered. I mean, they made a significant contribution to the Allied victory.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the central themes that Mary Cronk Farrell explores in Standing Up Against Hate. Yeah. I mean, the title really gives it away, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. The very title points to this primary theme, confronting racial injustice within, a segregated military system, which that's what we understand today as institutional racism.
Right.
So the book provides this powerful historical lens on this really crucial issue.
Right. And it really emphasizes the courage these women displayed in just, standing up against this deeply embedded system of prejudice. And it wasn't just like a one-time thing. It was navigating this discriminatory environment day in and day out.
Every day.
And that speaks to this incredible resilience and just sheer determination that these women had. I mean, they were facing obstacles as women in a very male-dominated military.
Yeah.
And as African Americans in a very racially biased society. And yet, they persevered.
They did.
They excelled in their roles.
They did.
They made a real difference.
Absolutely.
And I think their story is so important because it talks about these tangible contributions to the war effort.
Yeah.
They weren't just there. They were performing this crucial function. And by excelling, despite the discrimination, they really challenged these existing prejudices and opened doors for future generations of not only African-American women, but women in general within the military.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to consider Mary Cronk Farrell's background and her purpose in writing the book. As an award-winning author and a former journalist, she has a real history of focusing on stories of women who are often overlooked and courageous in history.
Yeah. And she's also the author of other books like Fanny Never Flinched and Pure Grit.
Oh, wow.
Which also focus on brave women facing adversity.
That's fantastic.
It seems like it's something she's really passionate about, like bringing these hidden histories to light.
Yeah.
Bringing them to the forefront. And she has said that her aim is to shine a light in shadowy, forgotten corners and empower us all to use our voices and to work constructively for what we believe. And I think that really captures the essence of standing up against hate.
It does.
And her intention to not just inform us about the past, but also inspire us in the present.
Absolutely.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close,
Yeah.
what are some key insights? What do you think people should take away from the story of these amazing women?
I think ultimately it's about the power of their bravery.
Yeah.
Their incredible resilience, and their absolutely vital contributions to the Allied victory.
Right.
These African-American women in the WAC, and particularly those who served in the 6 out or 88 thing, they faced profound discrimination both in and outside of the military. Yet they served with distinction, they excelled in their mission, and they stood up against hate in really meaningful ways.
Yeah, and their story is such a critical part of the larger story of history.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that to really understand the past, we have to acknowledge all the voices and experiences, especially those that have been historically marginalized. And the pursuit of equality really builds upon the foundation laid by individuals like these women.
And reflecting on standing up against hate, I think it really underscores that. It underscores the power of individuals to challenge injustice, even when they're faced with these huge systems of discrimination. And their perseverance in the face of adversity is truly inspiring. What about you? What resonates most with you about this story?
I think for me, it's that they didn't just endure. Like they actively resisted.
Yeah.
They saw the injustice. And despite the risks, they used their voices and their actions to push back against it. And I think it really makes you think about all the other hidden figures throughout history.
Oh, yeah.
The individuals and the groups whose contributions haven't been fully recognized. And so maybe this deep dive into the experiences of these women will inspire you, the listener, to seek out those untold stories and consider how their struggles and their triumphs continue to shape the world that we live in today.
I hope so. That would be fantastic.